Hi, I'm Shannon Vandermark, and this is the Happily Ever After Without Children podcast. Nice to have you back, subscribers, and a big welcome to any newcomers. This podcast is for anyone who doesn't have children, and for anyone who loves someone who doesn't have children. It is for those who have struggled to conceive, but also for anyone who has found themselves realizing that, for whatever reason, children of their own might not be in their futures. It is also for those steadfast in their decisions to never have children in the first place. Everyone holds a rightful place in this conversation. Everyone. And that means the men too. Because I am an independent producer, I don't have a publicity department. The only way anyone will ever find this program is through word of mouth, and by stacking up a pile of reviews on iTunes. If you like what you hear, please take a moment to write a review on the Happily Ever After Without Children podcast page on iTunes. No matter what your methods might be, I would not be opposed to you telling everyone you see about the Happily Ever Without Children podcast. Just the other day, my dad told his physical therapist about the program. I don't know, maybe that physical therapist might have told their dentist. And then I wonder whether that dentist might have told their receptionist, and whether that receptionist might have told their pedicurist. And well, the possibilities are endless, as you can see. If you would like to get in touch, send an email to me, reachhappilyeverafter@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter if you search Happily Ever After Podcast. This is my decasode. That's what I'm calling the 10th episode. There, I've made it a thing. Decasode. This week, I speak over the power of broadband, laptops, and conferencing software to my dear friend Erika Bertling in Los Angeles, whom I have known for an astounding 20 years. We met when we were both traveling the world working on TV shows. Erika was an audio engineer, and I was a story editor. Erika introduced me to the October 15th International Pregnancy and Infant Loss Day, and never fails to let me know on this day every year, in one way or another, that she is thinking of me. So having her as a guest today, on October 15th, is my way of telling her that I'm thinking of her on this day, and for expressing what a big part she has played in my healing, just from that little message she will send every year. I remember being on the phone with her when I was on bed rest during one of my miscarriages, and she was the only other person I told, other than my husband and my sister, that I was pregnant that one time when I was in LA meeting my nephew when he was brand new. Erika has been through the worst of it with me, even though we lived on opposite sides of the globe for the majority of our friendship. I wouldn't even say that we speak to each other once a year, and yet I would say that I owe a lot of my growth to Erika, and it is such an honor to have her speak to me today about her story, her views on the 15th of October, and to just listen to her refreshing perspective on life, on love, and pain. Erika does have a child, so we are able to tackle the challenging question of whether having a child can really guarantee you happiness. And having suffered secondary infertility, Erika still struggles from time to time with how to respond to things people say without realizing what they're saying.
I mean, I've had the experience of somebody, like I've said, this is even, it was even before I had the pregnancy loss after Lucas, where it was like, I said something about, I lost 3 before him. And this woman was like horrified. She's like, 3? That's terrible. Like, how old were they? And I said, I miscarried each one of them in about 10 weeks. She goes, I thought they were real babies. And I kind of wanted to punch her in the throat because, yeah, bitch, they were real babies. In the moment, this is what I think.
Yeah, of course.
Like, people say things, and if you can assume good intent, it helps so much.
Erika's wry humor and her sage ability to relentlessly see the good in people has helped her to come out on the other side, with her fair share of lacerations, bumps, and bruises for sure. But that same cheeky smile that I remember from when we first met is possibly more present than ever. Oh, and I will say we recorded this in video, so there might be some mention of what we look like while we're speaking. You can get that on the Patreon page if you are interested. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I will check in with you at the break. Erika.
Hi, Shannon.
I was thinking, should I introduce like that we know each other at all, or should I just like conduct like this interview? But then I was like, it's going to be impossible to listen to this and be like, oh, what, that they've just met?
No, we've known each other it's been almost 20 years since the Coast Guard had to bring us in on our jet skis together.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, that was one of our inaugural shenanigans together, shenanigans as it were.
Oh my gosh, that is like the story of my life getting brought back in.
We have seen each other through, from being our carefree, single jet setting world traveling ladies.
That's right.
Older jet setting world traveling married ladies.
Yes. Yeah. And we've caught up over the years a couple times in LA. I've come to visit you.
Indeed. And I've come to see you.
And you've enjoyed our wall mint.
I have. I love your wall mint.
We don't have the wall mint anymore.
You don't? I'm
no. But we have wall lavender, which is kind of just as nice.
That is nice. That any kind of wall herb, I think, is any kind of wall plant is nice.
It's just like plants are like, don't hold me back, wall. I'm going to come through.
We call it our poop rosemary, but we have something similar. It was where my neighbor threw a dead pot of rosemary, but it was right over a sewer line, and now it is a gigantic hedge, and it smells amazing.
Over the sewer.
Yeah, well, because the sewer line from the house to the city line runs right underneath that patch where she threw what she thought was the dead pot of rosemary. And there you have it, a thriving hedge of beautifulness.
It probably loves that fertilizer it's got underneath it.
Exactly right. There's so many life metaphors in the poop rosemary, I can't even tell you.
I love that. So tell me where you are now.
I am standing in my home in sunny Southern California. It's about 26 degrees today. That's why I'm wearing something sleeveless. I'm standing in front of a green furniture pad, which is a large, thick blanket that's used in production world to actually do exactly what it's doing now, which is to deaden sound so that I can sound better for Shannon, because I used to do what her delightful husband does, and I cannot disappoint him or disrespect our profession.
Oh, everybody listening will thank you, even though they don't know why. They're hearing something great. And I'm wearing a wool jumper.
You are wearing a wool jumper because you're living at a very different latitude.
We are, but it's actually not so bad. It's kind of nice and crisp over here. So let's get right into it. Tell me about your thank you for talking to me, by the way.
You know that I believe that talking about it is, I think, one of the most important things that somebody who's gone through an experience that would cause them to recognize October 15th, that talking about it is one of the most important things you can do. And I believe deeply in that. So I'm more than happy to climb up on the soapbox.
Climb up on the furniture pad.
That's exactly right.
So tell me, when you were growing up, did you have a story of your life that you kind of wrote? If so, tell me, what was it? How old were you when you kind of formed it?
I feel like in some ways we all have our story that we start forming right away, depending on our circumstances. And for me, I grew up in a very stable nuclear family. My parents are still married and still very much like each other. And I am one of the lucky ones that way. I had that model of family for me. And so I always wanted that and thought that that's what I would have too. I have a sister. So to me, a family was, it seemed like pretty normal to have 2 adults and 2 children. Of course, as I grew older, I understood that family comes in all shapes, sizes, and in different ways. But I think at the deep down lizard brain part of myself, and also knowing from a very early age too, that, I was a straight cisgendered woman, that I would hopefully find a husband someday and that we would have 2 adorable biological children together. Because that's what happens.
And so tell me your story. How, you found, I remember when you found that guy, that German guy,
I know, it's true.
that handsome German swimmer.
So yeah, I think that's the thing yeah, it took us, we had our own, as you and your husband did, we had our own cultural and geographic hurdles to get over. But, so we weren't strangers to struggle before we got married. We knew what it was to have opposition that came from circumstance. And we found that it pushed us together rather than split us apart. Once we did get married, which was later in life, our ages started with a 3, but we were like, we should have a year. We called it the no plants, no cats, no kids plan, because it was like nothing living that we need to be responsible for in that first year of marriage, because you want to give yourself a chance to concentrate on that. It's a whole new chapter of your life. And then after a year, we started trying, and by that I mean I went off the pill and nothing happened, and then more nothing happened, and then 6 months went by, and then we got to almost a year. And because I had just, like, around that time was sort of 35, 36, when they make it sound like if you're over 35, getting pregnant and having a baby is like some gargantuan feat of impossibility.
Mm-hmm.
That's when, so I thought, okay, maybe we should be a little bit more, focused on this or whatever. And then I did get pregnant. And it was delightful and joyful. And I so innocently and happily was like, yay, it finally happened. And I won't have to go through all those things that I started reading about and whatever. And I also didn't wait for the 12 weeks. I didn't see a point in waiting for the 12 weeks to pass. I think maybe I just hadn't heard about that. I'm not exactly sure why to this day, why I kind of was like, screw it. I don't need to wait for 12 weeks. But I announced it via starting a little blog that I thought would be a great place to update people and also get feedback, because a lot of people I knew already had children. And I was like, why not tap the hive mind for wisdom and stuff? And then, I was like, I saw a heartbeat, and then all of a sudden, end of week 10, there was blood, there was no heartbeat, and just like that, it was all over. And I had very little preparation for what that would be like. I knew, sort of like fact-based knowing, that my mother had miscarried a child between me and my sister. But she never had talked about it really. And it was sort of just like, we know this stuff happens. I was definitely not prepared for the emotional impact that would bring. I know I felt in some ways, very guilty as well about it. I read some of the early entries on the blog, and it's a little heartbreaking, the innocence that I had there about how much I thought that I would be able to get over this and move on and get pregnant again and have another baby, and maybe it was just like, it was just that first round it didn't work out or whatever. But there are things you cannot erase from your mind. You can't erase that image of, seeing that heartbeat on the ultrasound. You can't forget what it was like to not have your pants fit and feel pukey or like you want to fall asleep all the time. And you can't forget what your husband's face looked like when you showed him the positive test or when you told him, or however. Women who I think have experienced pregnancy loss, there's a whole host of memories that you have that are joyful, that then have this tinge, not even a tinge, but then it's almost like this coating of this sorrow that goes over it. And those can become corrosive if you don't acknowledge them. And what followed after that is a lot more infertility, which brings its own delightful bits, as many listeners know, charting cycles and testing your cervical mucus. And sex is not fun anymore. And really, you do things like declare it's Humpathon week. Yay! And
It's fun, right?
so fun. Yay. And yeah. And it's,
Umpathon week.
you know, and there was acupuncture and herbs, and I did get pregnant again, but it took over another year. And that pregnancy was really hard because there was no more innocent joy about it. It felt like this goal that I had been desperately working towards. And finally it happened. And that pregnancy also I lost right around week 10. And that one was very physically painful as well, because with the first one, I miscarried and my body took care of things. This one, it did not. I took misoprostol for it, which is a whole nother thing. There are multiple ways, as they say, of clearing your body of, quote, the products of conception, which is a phrase that is so, like, it makes it, I still get a catch in my throat saying it. It's such a weird way of referring to your future that's gone. And it's a very painful and it was very difficult. That was a very difficult physical process. And I remember during that number 2, I remember thinking, if I lose this pregnancy, I might die. And I lost it and I didn't die. But what did die was, I think, the future that I thought I had, the story that I had written for myself. That's when it got very real. And I realized this is going to be a thing.
This isn't going to be plain sailing.
No, I think I held on to that even after the loss of the first baby, because I really had this whole narrative of like, well, these things happen. Miscarriages are common. It happens to a lot of women. I'm older, you know, maybe people tell you the craziest stuff, like your body was just getting used to being pregnant and whatever.
It just wanted to get all of that make-believe stuff out before it got ready for real. Yeah. I mean, people
say amazing things, both positive and negative.
Yes.
Yeah. I actually have two standalone blog posts about like what not to say to people who have experienced pregnancy loss and what to say. And all of them are things I've experienced, because everybody seems to have something to say. That is something, when you choose to talk about it, you do have to, that's part of the package deal.
Yeah.
You also have to accept all of the stuff that comes out of when people are not using their brain to mouth filter. You have to be willing to accept that.
Or, as I think a lot of times, just nobody's ever told them and they've never been through it. And so actually, even if they thought about it, they thought that they're saying the right thing.
And that's where you have to decide if you're willing to take the responsibility of being the person who can help educate them.
So that was number 2. I didn't realize that they were both at around the same time. And it took, it's quite similar to mine.
Like week 10 was like the evil week of death and doom, because I lost number 3 on week 10 as well.
Right.
So yeah. And that was the thing. So after number 2, another year plus went by. And then I did get pregnant with number 3, which I almost didn't expect to have happen, but it happened. And this time there was really this feeling of like, let's see what happens, which in and of itself was a small death, because you want to be excited and happy and joyful about being pregnant. After all, this is what you want, is it not? But I was so aware that becoming pregnant does not mean, well, it didn't mean anything at that point. It just meant that I somehow got pregnant again. But it didn't mean anything in terms of that you might actually have a child. And again, it was like there was a heartbeat and things seemed to be going fine. And then end of week 10, around there, I lost her as well.
And when did you become aware of Pregnancy and Baby Loss Awareness Day? Is it called the same thing?
It is the National Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day, but it's been changed to international because now it is recognized quite robustly all around the world.
When did you start doing something in for this day?
One of the good things about me announcing my pregnancy far before week 12 with the very first one is that I had a lot of people who could give me compassion and show me a lot of people. You don't necessarily want to be like, hey, by the way, I'm so crushed and sad and weighed down by grief right now because I was pregnant and now I'm not. Like, this is not something you just like bust out to people.
No.
But if people knew you were pregnant and then they knew you lost that baby, then of course there is more compassion there for it. It was the known deal. So in retrospect, I'm very thankful that I didn't wait. And I've also come to believe that in some ways that whole like don't talk about it till after the 12th week, in some ways it's extremely misogynistic. It is completely discounting this very, very profoundly difficult and life-changing experience that a woman and her body is having for the sake of what? Not upsetting other people later, possibly.
I think it's ridiculous, and I think it should totally change, because the only reason why you're told not to tell anyone is to avoid having to tell people if something goes wrong. And my sister said the same thing, because she she had a miscarriage before I did, and she was like, when she got pregnant with her now son, she was like, well, why would I wait? Because if I lose this, I'd rather just be like, call and just say things aren't good anymore than explain I was pregnant and then explain. And it's just teaching people to not talk about it.
It is. And it's also, I think, it's feeding into that whole, like, your experiences and your emotions are less important than somebody else feeling awkward or uncomfortable.
Mm.
That's where, like, I've kind of made that journey from being like, I don't think it's okay that we're told to not talk about our pregnancies in case we lose them, to being like, yeah, I think that's straight up misogynistic and it's total bullshit.
Yeah.
Which is honestly where I am now. I share that opinion in a very limited form, only when I know my audience. Because it's a pretty harsh thing to say, but that is at base my belief in that. But when you get to the point, I think, where you understand that one of the biggest paradoxes of the human experience is that we have this enormous capacity for love and for joy. But because of that, we also have this enormous capacity for pain and for grief, and that they coexist. They have this duality that it's, if you're familiar with the yin and yang concept, it's very much that you do not have great love without the possibility of great pain. You don't have the possibility of great gain without the possibility of great loss. And you love anyway. And that's the thing, is that when you love anyway, you find that love still in the pain. You find it still in all those shattered fragments of the future you never get to have. And that's why I don't think that the opposite of happily ever after without children is not happily ever after with children. It's a choice that you make about your life, about being in the here and now and living today, because that's what you've got. And I think that I know that I still approach Mother's Day and October 15th with sorrow and grief, because I loved every single one of my children, all 5 of them. One of them happens to still be living in my house right now, but the other 4 are still very much alive in our memories and in our hearts as real people who had real futures that we didn't get to know. You can choose the times that you deal with your grief, or they will choose you, and I promise it will not be convenient. So emotions are not necessarily less valid or less well felt if you schedule them. Because sometimes you do have to anticipate and make space for them. We do that with birthdays, right? We anticipate and schedule the happiness and joy of celebrating a birthday. And so the flip side of that, I think, can also be true.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And I think October 15th provides that for many, many people. And that's why it's so important. That's another reason why it's so important. October 15th provides that. It provides that space for people in a way that gives permission. And also knowing that all around the world, there are lights going and candles going and people thinking about that. Like knowing that there are literally hundreds and thousands, if not millions of people, literally worldwide, recognizing this very, very real, massive amount of outpouring of love is super healing.
And unisolating.
So with October 15th, I think one of the hardest things for other people who love people who have gone through infant and pregnancy losses, what do you say to these people? Like, what do you do? Like, how do I recognize it? You don't come up to somebody and say, happy October 15th, happy pregnancy loss day, you know?
That wouldn't go down very well.
That wouldn't go down very well. Like, so, but at the same time, I've had people say, well, what do you know, don't you cause more pain by reminding people of their loss? My answer to that is, I mean, do you ever forget that you've lost that many children?
No.
Do I forget? No, like you don't forget that. When you've lost a dream, and especially if that dream was a future with a real child that existed in some way for you, you don't forget that. And for somebody to say, I'm sorry for your loss. I love you and I support you. It's immensely meaningful because you know that child that you're mourning doesn't exist in some vacuum in your mind. Other people remember that child. Other people remember that this is something that you carry. Other people continue to make that real. And the acknowledgement of your loss is an acknowledgement of your love.
Mm.
And so that is why I think October 15th is an incredibly important day to recognize, not just for those who have experienced the losses, but for the people who love them, who support them.
Yeah, and I think that if somebody were to come up to me and say something, like anybody who'd be afraid of bringing it up,
mm-hmm.
You might get upset by somebody saying that, but you might look upset that somebody's saying that, but what you're doing is going, oh, thank you for allowing me to, or just great gratitude for like bringing it up.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And also like, I don't know, I think people are worried about bringing up anybody's grief because they don't want to upset
mm-hmm.
people. But maybe it's more they're worried about feeling uncomfortable if that person gets upset. But you're not upsetting them by bringing it up. You're not personally responsible. Mm-hmm. You are just putting yourself out on a limb and putting yourself in a position where you might have to be the shoulder they cry on it for that moment.
That is 100% true. And both, I think, from a sort of theoretical perspective and also in my own personal anecdotal experience perspective. And I've had some really amazing conversations come from that willingness to be open.
By just opening up. Yeah. Yeah. It's reaching
up, but also offering a way forward. I think you can't just like drop it on somebody and expect them to respond positively. Because now, I get a lot, oh, is he your only one? Aren't you going to have another kid? Oh, he needs a sister or a brother. And I mean, those are incredibly painful comments because after my husband and I made the very painful and difficult decision, which in many ways is similar to the conversation and decision-making process that couples go through to choose to be child-free, we chose to, when you decide you're like, we're done. We're not trying anymore. This is the life we have, and this is the life we're going to be happy with. We're not a family with not enough children. We're a family of 3. That's abundance. We're going to move forward with that. And after we made that decision, I got pregnant again, and I lost that pregnancy. So when people say those things, I'm honest with them. I'm like, actually, I've had 5 children. He's the only one who made it. So he is my another. And then I say, and I'm incredibly blessed by that. He's more than what I thought that I was going to ever get to have. And then people are happy about hearing that, and they can move forward with that. But it also gives them the truth of my story, and again, also gives them that way forward to talk about their own experience. And again, with that, I've had more people been able to talk about their experiences with the difficulty of, basically closing and latching the gate on whatever they thought their family was going to look like, and having to move forward with where they are now.
I'm going to take a short break here and share with you a poem that I wrote to the babies who I will never get to meet. I wrote this poem for a baby and pregnancy loss memorial service that was extremely therapeutic for both Robin and I. It gave life to our babies because it allowed us to acknowledge them and to say goodbye to them in a way we hadn't before. The poem is called I Won't Miss You. I won't miss you, you see, as we've never met. It was the great privilege I just didn't get. I will not mourn memories never been made, dreams of seeing your face now beginning to fade. I won't miss embracing your head with my hands. I've not even held you. I do understand. I won't miss seeing your dad be a daddy and teaching you all that he knows. He's got so much goodness to offer. It is quite a shame, I suppose. I won't miss the plans, the hopes, and the dreams, the idyllic life I so briefly gleaned. Our parents won't miss you, though they loved you too. My sister won't worry, there's more she should do. I'll stop counting the losses I've borne along the way, names that I'll never call, not even get to say. I'll convince everyone that without you we're fine. I'll quit wishing that each passing buggy were mine. Soon I'll believe it was not meant to be. I'll stop grieving for not having you here with me. I carry on like everything's normal, and I've not been irreparably changed. Life will carry on. Plans will be arranged. I'll picture you happy in some better place. Perhaps I might meet you once I leave this race. If it wasn't for you, we would not feel so tested and into each other so strongly invested. You've helped us to be better at loving and giving. This life is so precious, one we're grateful we're living. Thank you for letting me share that with you, and I'll check in with you on the other side. I am interested in how much your pregnancy losses still affect you, because I did think that Lucas would have been a magic wand.
Yeah, no, not at all. My infertility and pregnancy loss, and also the fact that not only did Thomas and I come to an agreement that we would be willing to be child-free, we both agreed that adoption was not for us. And so the only thing that seemed left there that we both agreed upon was our marriage was immensely important to us. We loved each other, and we had made promises that we were absolutely invested in keeping. And so that if we were going to move forward as a family of two with no children, that's what we were going to do. And we were going to be happy with that. And that was the story. If that was the story that we were given to live, then we were going to live it the best we could.
Can I ask you, when you made that decision, when you were talking about just having the two of you and not have before Lucas, was there a part of you that felt like, if I can just have a child, then I can get rid of this horrible pain? Did you think that?
I would say after the first two pregnancy losses, I still thought having a baby would make this all better. It would make it all go away.
Yeah.
It would make all of this heal and be just fine, and I would be happy and could move ahead with my life. After number three, for a variety of reasons, I never thought that ever again. Because I think by the time number three rolled around, I had done the work both internally and with my husband and with with two very trusted therapists. I'm a huge fan of counseling.
Yep.
awesome. It's like going to the chiropractor. Just you're emotionally stuck and you need to be unstuck. That I needed I think because of that kind of investment, I had gotten to that point where I had recognized that true nature of the duality of joy and grief, and that no matter what happened in the future, that I would carry that grief if I chose to continue acknowledging the love I had for those children that never were. So yeah, after the first 2 miscarriages, this is why, it's like one of the things that I had to really sit with. You must take your circumstances and you choose your direction. So you can either be defined as that grieving mother with empty arms, or you can be yourself, and that weeping childless mother is a component of who you are. So once I had made that leap of realizing that that grief doesn't get erased necessarily, that it's something that gets folded into who I am and actually makes me a better and stronger person. I did not ever think that again, that having a child would be the magic bullet to make me happy. We walk through life with this total illusion that we have all this control over our life, especially if we're lucky enough to have been born into the right class, or with the right amount of money, or with the right skin tone, or with the right gender, whatever. With all of our privilege, we think that we have control, and we have none, really. At the end of the day, I mean, just think about how your life turns around on a dime when you get a bad virus, right? All your plans, you're down. Something that you can't even see with your naked eye just took you out. And I think you can either walk through life terrified and fearful of those things that you can't see, or you walk through life yeah, shit's gonna happen.
Bring it.
Yeah, exactly. Bring it. And I feel like a huge part of making that difference is gratitude. You've talked about this extensively before on this podcast, and that was a huge turning point for you as well. And I totally want to read that book that you talked about, because I feel like that there it is on my bookshelf, she says.
It's right here.
Oh my God, you're not wearing pants. No, I'm just kidding.
Do you know what? I only just put them on because I was like, I might do a video, but that is the first thing I take off when I come home from work.
I know, of course.
But you were saying about gratitude, that it's incredibly important.
That gratitude is, I believe that gratitude is honestly one of the biggest keys to successfully rewriting your story. From I got gypped out of this future that was mine to have, to being, I'm living my future right now. And it's amazing. And I'm going to make it amazing. With or without that dream job, with or without that dream partner, with or without that dream child.
So that, I guess, would lead me to that, what I was going to ask you with, how can somebody find hope in a future without children? Because by their very nature, children represent hope. And if you had this little kernel of hope inside you, how do you replace that? What is there's no replacement for life as a future, as it feels, sometimes it feels like smoke and mirrors, like it's okay for a while, but then you're like, it's irreplaceable. It's something, it's the way, life carries on. And how do you reconcile that, do you think?
I think that the best way for me to answer that is maybe because I did, for some reason, get blessed enough to actually have a living child that I didn't expect that I would ever be able to have. I can honestly say from experience that children cannot be the repository of your happiness, because by their very nature, they will totally disappoint you. And if you put your happiness in them, they will totally make you miserable, because they are their own sovereign being. It's a whole sovereign human being with their own agency. Even when they're this little ectoplasmic blob of infant spitting, nonverbal, like they just like cry and puke and, that's all they're still a human being with their own agency, and they will be their own person. And we've seen that over and over in literature and movies. That's a story we're super familiar with, how when a parent puts all their hopes and dreams on a child, it almost always all goes to shit, right? I can't think of one story in popular culture, in classic literature, in movie, I can't think of one story in which a parent pinned all their hopes and dreams on a child and everything turned out great. Happily ever after the end. No, usually it goes totally pear-shaped.
Yep.
That's because the very nature of a child, that there is hope, but that hope is the child's hope. It's not your hope. That's where I think you find hope in your future, because it's your future. You cannot pin your future to your child. Letting go of hope for a dream that's not going to become a reality, that is true loss. And that loss is not connected. It is not connected to all the dreams that have come true. And so they should not be related. And yet that's what we do. We think a person who's really happy must have very little sorrow in their life. A person who's really unhappy must have really little joy in her life. And it's completely not true. In fact, I believe, if anything, it's the opposite. If you have great joy in your life, you probably also have great loss and sorrow.
So can you tell me how your experiences have carried on into your parenting? Do you feel like he's a bit of a valuable vase that you can't drop?
Right. That's a very, very valid question. I would say that I take my experience with infertility and pregnancy loss and decisions about not having any more children into every single day I have with my son. I can't think of one way where I'm not affected by that with him. Because I know how that he was like this bonus gift, because I didn't expect that I could have him. And because I had so much pain and grief and sorrow and struggle in the journey to have him, I think I hold him with very loose hands. He's not mine. I just get to have him for now. And he will go out in the world someday on his own. And I don't say that because I'm such a great person or whatever. I think it comes back to that idea again about being comfortable with the emotional duality that love and loss go hand in hand. So, I mean, I think on that tack, I would say as well, speaking about hope does not lie in things getting easier. Hope does not lie in whatever it was that you lost somehow being restored to you. Hope comes from you recognizing that you get stronger. This is not an original thought. I can't claim it. I think it was another, I don't remember where I got it from, but it was this idea that with grief not having an expiration date, that carrying sadness doesn't get easier. You just get stronger. So one of the questions you had asked about, how do you honor October 15th? And we have our family lights candles. There are 5 of them, and we say all the children's names. We have a big family hug. We talk about the people who have made us a family with their love. And it gives Lucas a sort of idea of where he is in the line of things. He knows about it. I've gotten some pushback from people who think it's weird or not good that I talk to him, that he knows that he had brothers and sisters who didn't make it. But I'm kind of the mind of that's my decision. So thank you for sharing I know that when someone acknowledges that day to me, it's very meaningful. It's not, you're not hurting my feelings. You are not reminding me of something that I'm not already very aware of all the time.
Yeah.
It's not like someone's like, I just want you to know October 15th, I'm remembering with you, the babies that you lost. And I go, oh God, those, I forgot all about them.
How dare you?
I'm going to go ahead and say probably there's not one person who would have that response at all. And if they do, I would question their I would question how in touch with their authentic emotions they truly are.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the one thing that I might want to still say is, to those people who know and love those who have experienced any kind of child loss, and wherever they are now, when you come to them, literally or figuratively, alongside them, and say, I love you, I support you, I'm sorry for your loss, you're being very courageous. Because you're letting them know that they're not doing this alone, and that you stand with them in empathy and in hope. Not hope that they might have children later, but hope for their future, which is right now, that you believe in them, that you love them, whether or not they are joyful or sorrowful or whatever. But and it's courageous because you're putting yourself out there in a way that probably feels uncomfortable to you. And so I would encourage people to do that.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's been great.
It has been wonderful. And 20 years ago when the Coast Guard dragged us in on our jet skis, don't think we would have seen this coming. But in some ways, it's not surprising either.
No, we were never going to trod the trodden path.
No.
Or the trodden waves.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to see a photo of myself and the effervescent Erika from the day of our interview, please check us out on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter if you search for Happily Ever After Podcast. In fact, that's where you can find photos of most of my guests, as well as even some choice photos of my kitchen, my garden, and my cat Daisy, if any of that tickles your fancy. Also, if you become a Patreon, you can see the video version of our interview and with additional content. You can find a link to Erika's Tummy Muffin blog, which is very good, as well as my contact details in the show notes. If you like the show, please help me to promote it in any way you can. You can also write a quick review in iTunes. More reviews help to make the show more visible to anyone searching for this topic. It's some algorithm thing. And finally, please share details of this podcast with your network of friends and family. You never know who else might be suffering and could really use a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. This is your host, Shannon Vandermark, and I thank you for listening.